Before death, there was time. 4 hours of time. 4 hours where a man remained conscious, aware, feeling every second stretch into eternity. There are executions in history that we read about in textbooks, clean sentences, dates and names. But some executions transcend history and become something else entirely. They become warnings written in flesh, lessons carved into the human body. This is the story of Robert-François Damiens and the execution that was so horrific, so prolonged, that it changed the course of European justice forever. And it all began with a tiny penknife. January 5th, 1757, Versailles. King Louis XV was leaving the palace when a man emerged from the crowd of courtiers. His name was Robert-François Damiens, a former domestic servant, a man no one noticed. Until that moment, he had a small penknife, barely 4 inches long. As the king passed, Damiens struck, one thrust between the ribs. The blade was so small it barely penetrated the king's thick winter coat. The wound was superficial. Louis would survive. But Damiens had committed the unthinkable. He had struck the body of the king. In the absolute monarchy of 18th century France, the king's body was sacred. It was the physical manifestation of God's will on earth. To wound it was not just murder, it was regicide. It was an attack on the divine order itself. And for that, there could be only one punishment. A punishment so terrible it had not been used in France for over a century. The punishment reserved for those who attacked the king. He would be torn apart by horses. While still alive, the sentence was read on March 26, 1757. It took 20 minutes to recite in full. Every word was chosen to maximize terror, every phrase designed to strip away his humanity, piece by piece. The sentence declared that Robert-François Damiens would be taken to the Place de Grève, the main public square of Paris. There, his right hand, the hand that held the knife, would be burned with molten sulfur until the flesh melted from the bone. Then, his chest, arms, thighs, and legs would be torn with red-hot pincers. Into these wounds, executioners would pour a mixture of molten lead, boiling oil, burning resin, and liquid sulfur. Only after this would the horses be brought. 4 horses, each tied to one of his limbs. They would pull in opposite directions until his body was ripped apart at the joints. Finally, whatever remained would be burned to ash and scattered to the wind. He would be erased, not just killed, but unmade. The trial was a formality. Damiens had confessed immediately. He claimed he wanted to awaken the king to the suffering of the people. He believed God had commanded him to act. The court didn't care about his reasons. He had 61 days to wait. 61 days knowing exactly what was coming. March 28th, 1757, dawn. They came for him at 5 in the morning. The streets of Paris had been packed since midnight. Over 50,000 people crowded into the square and surrounding streets. Entire families came. Parents brought their children. It was the event of the century. Damiens was dressed in nothing but a thin white shirt. His hands were bound behind his back. He was placed in a cart and paraded through the streets for over an hour. This was not transportation. This was the first act of the punishment. The crowd screamed at him. They threw stones, rotting food, filth from the gutters. But witnesses noted something strange. Damiens didn't scream back. He didn't cry or beg. He seemed almost calm, as if he had already left his body, preparing his mind for what was to come. He couldn't prepare enough. At 6:30 in the morning, the cart arrived at Place de Grève. A large wooden scaffold had been constructed in the center of the square. On it, a St. Andrew's cross, shaped like an X. Braziers were already lit, heating the instruments. The crowd pressed closer, and the execution began. They tied him to the cross. Arms spread wide, legs apart, completely exposed. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, approached with the first instrument. The crowd fell silent. Damien's right hand was forced into a metal brace. The executioner took a ladle of molten sulfur from the brazier. The liquid was nearly 300 degrees. He poured it slowly over Damien's hand. Witnesses described the sound, the hiss of sulfur eating through flesh, the smell of burning meat and hair. Damien screamed. Not words, just sound. Pure animal agony. His hand turned black almost instantly. The flesh bubbled and peeled away from the bone in strips. The sulfur burned so hot it cauterized the wounds as it destroyed them. There was surprisingly little blood. This took 15 minutes. His hand was gone, reduced to charred bone still attached to his wrist. But he was still conscious, still aware. The executioner moved to the next stage. The pincers, these were not ordinary tools. They had been specially forged with jagged inner edges designed to tear rather than cut. They were heated until they glowed orange. The executioner selected the first spot, Damien's right breast. He clamped the pincers down and twisted. The flesh came away in a smoking chunk. Damien's convulsed so violently he nearly broke the restraints. His screams reached a pitch witnesses said they would never forget. One woman in the crowd fainted. Several others vomited. The executioner moved methodically. Right breast, right thigh, left thigh, right arm, left arm. Each time, the pincers bit deep, tore away flesh, left gaping wounds. Into each wound, assistants poured the mixture: molten lead, boiling oil, burning resin, liquid sulfur. The substances reacted with his blood and exposed tissue, creating small explosions of steam and flame inside his body. This went on for an hour, an entire hour. Historians who studied the witness accounts noted something remarkable. Damiens never lost consciousness. At several points, he appeared to be praying. His lips moved, forming silent words. Some thought he was begging for mercy. Others believed he was praying for his executioners. By the end of the first hour, his body was a landscape of burns and torn flesh. But he was still alive, still breathing, still aware. Now came the part everyone was waiting for: the horses. 4 horses were brought forward, black stallions, each one selected for its strength. Thick ropes were tied around Damien's wrists and ankles. The other ends were secured to the horses' harnesses. The executioner gave the signal. The handlers cracked their whips. The horses pulled. Nothing happened. The human body is remarkably strong. Our joints, our ligaments, our connective tissue, they're designed to hold us together. The horses pulled harder. Damien's body stretched. His shoulders began to dislocate. You could hear the sounds, popping, cracking, but his limbs didn't tear free. The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The horses strained for 20 minutes, 30. Damiens was being pulled in 4 directions with such force that his body elevated off the scaffold. But still, he remained in one piece. One witness, a priest named Father Barrett, was standing close enough to see Damien's face. He later wrote that Damiens looked at him with an expression of such profound suffering that it haunted him for the rest of his life. At the 40-minute mark, the executioner called for more horses. 2 additional horses were brought and attached to his arms. 6 horses now, pulling with combined force of over 12,000 pounds. Still, his body would not tear. The crowd was becoming restless. Some were shouting for it to end. Others wanted to see more. The executioner made a decision. he called for a knife. He approached Damiens and made deep incisions at the joints, at the shoulders, at the hips, at the knees, at the elbows. He cut through the ligaments, through the tendons, through the connective tissue that was holding Damiens together. Blood poured onto the scaffold, more than at any point before, and still, incredibly, Damiens was conscious. His chest was rising and falling. His eyes were moving. The executioner gave the signal again. The horses pulled. This time, there was a sound like wet wood splitting. First, his right arm tore free at the shoulder. The horse lurched forward, dragging the limb behind it. Then his left arm, then his left leg. Finally, his right leg. What remained on the scaffold was a torso, still breathing, still alive. For several more minutes, witnesses saw his chest rising and falling. His head turned slightly from side to side. Only then did the executioner perform the mercy stroke. He cut Damiens' throat, and finally, after more than 4 hours, Robert-François Damiens died. The remains were gathered and thrown into a massive bonfire that had been prepared. They burned through the night. By morning, there was nothing left but ash, which was scattered into the Seine River. Robert-François Damiens had been erased. But something unexpected happened. The execution that was meant to terrify the population into submission had the opposite effect. The sheer horror of what they had witnessed traumatized the city. Accounts spread across Europe. Artists created engravings of the scene that circulated for years. Many who watched, including members of the nobility, were so disturbed they began questioning the nature of royal power. How could a civilized nation do this to a human being, regardless of his crime? Was this justice, or was this barbarism? Among those in the crowd that day was a young philosophy student. His name was Voltaire. He would later write about Damiens' execution as an example of the cruelty of absolute monarchy, helping to spark the ideas that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. The execution of Robert-François Damiens was the last time the full punishment of drawing and quartering was used in France. The horror of that day marked the beginning of the end for such medieval practices. 32 years later, the same Place de Grève would see a different kind of execution. The guillotine, quick, efficient. The revolutionary government that overthrew the monarchy declared that execution should be swift and painless, no matter the crime. They had learned the lesson written in Damiens' suffering. Today, Place de Grève is called Place de l'Hôtel de Ville. It's a beautiful square where tourists take photos and children play. There's no marker, no plaque, nothing to indicate what happened there. But on March 28, 1757, for 4 hours, it was hell on earth. So the next time you hear about executions in history, remember Robert-François Damiens. Remember that behind every date, every sentence in a textbook, there was a human being. And sometimes, the suffering they endured was beyond anything we can imagine. This was not just an execution. It was the moment when humanity looked at itself and saw a monster.
I want to hear your ideas for my next video, so drop a comment below. Your support means a lot, so please smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already.